Good morning and welcome to the webinar Violence Against Women in the Context of Peace, Security and Conflict. As Jane Addams, Nobel Peace Prize laureate, once said, true peace is not merely the absence of war, it is the presence of justice. Justice demands equality, and when women are excluded, threatened, or attacked, justice is absent, and so is peace. Today, we examine how violence against women weakens both peace and democracy. In many parts of Eastern Europe, violence against women remains widespread and rooted in gender inequality. About 1 in 4 women have experienced physical or sexual violence, and psychological abuse is even more common. Weak laws, social tolerance of abuse, and limited support keep many cases unreported. Yet women continue to speak, lead, and demand change. Their persistence shows that when women claim their rights, they strengthen the foundations of peace and democracy. This webinar brings together voices from Armenia, Belarus, Georgia, and Sweden to discuss how institutions and civil society can respond to gender-based violence during and after conflict. We will also look at how frameworks like the Istanbul Convention and UN Security Council Resolution 1325 strengthen accountability and protection. I am Anne Helge, coordinator of the Swedish network for the Eastern Partnership at Forum CIV. The network includes 39 Swedish organizations working in Eastern Europe on democracy, human rights, and sustainable development. I'll be your moderator today. This webinar is organized by Winnet Sweden and Forum CIV, the third of our series on gender equality. We have 4 speakers today, and each has strong experience promoting equality, democracy, and peace at local and global levels. Let me introduce them. Carola Gunnarsson. Carola is Special Envoy at United Cities and local governments. With long experience in Swedish local politics and global municipal networks, she focuses on protecting women leaders and defending democracy from hate and threats. Moretta Bobokice. Moretta is a human rights defender from Georgia and international advocacy consultant with the Anti-Violence Network of Georgia. She works on justice, media freedom, and survivor-centered responses in fragile contexts. Envat Manasyan is a gender equality expert from Armenia. She has also worked with the UN on governance and gender reforms, linking research, policy, and community action. Julia Mikiewicz. Julia is a Belarus gender expert and political activist. She leads the gender equality team in the United Transition Cabinet of Belarus and co-founded Femme Group Belarus during the 2020 protests to promote women's rights and leadership. Now based in Lithuania, she heads ABF Belarus and serves on the Council of Europe Contact Group for Belarus. Thank you all for joining us. Before we begin, I'd like to turn to Britt-Marie Torstensson, President of Winnet Sweden. Britt-Marie, could you share why Winnet Sweden and Forum CIV are organizing this webinar series, and what do you hope it will contribute to the broader work for gender equality?
Thank you, Anne, and good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you. This webinar is the third in a series that Winnet Sweden and Forum CIV have organized on gender equality in the Eastern Partnership region. In our first discussion, we focused on why women's participation is essential for democracy. The second looked at women's peace building. Each discussion has built on the last, moving from participation to peace protection. Today we turn to a difficult but vital topic, violence against women, and how it weakens both peace and democracy. Across the region, women continue to lead, organize, and hold communities together, often under threat. Their safety and participation are not separate issues. They are central in democracy itself. Visit Sweden works through local women resource centers that support women to engage, influence decision makers, and drive change in their communities. Together with Forum Syd, we want to connect these local experiences with a broader policy and international cooperation. Our goal today is to move from understanding to action, to share lessons, strength, protection, and support to the women who continue to lead despite of risks. Thank you for joining us and for being a part of this important conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Britt-Marie, and for you to know that our webinars are recorded and you can find them on Forumsiv website. So with that introduction, let's move into the first session where we talk about how violence against women undermines democracy and peace. Let's start with you, Carola. You long defended women's leaders from hate and threats. From your experience, how does this attack limit women's ability to lead and participate in decision making? And what measures keep them in office? In 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. I'm deeply convinced that gender equality and social inclusion must be at the heart of local and regional governance. Women's leadership is not only a matter of representation, it's about transforming the culture of power and the very way we govern our communities. But today we see a decrease in democracy and also a decrease in gender equality all around the world. This became even clearer after the COVID pandemic. The rise of populist and far-right forces in Europe and beyond is also attempting to roll back decades of hard-won rights. That is why local and regional governments must stand firm as bastions of democracy, human rights, and gender equality. Ultimately, women's leadership fosters more inclusive, more peaceful, and resilient societies. But we must go beyond symbolic inclusion to full and meaningful participation in all aspects of public life. There is no peace without justice. There is no democracy without gender equality. And there is no future if women are not safe to lead. What can we do then to guarantee women's long-term leadership in decision-making spaces in political life in the face of the harassment and political violence they suffer? First of all, we need a cultural change. We need to transform the political culture itself, rejecting toxic masculinity, dismantling patriarchy, and promoting respect and equality as core democratic values. This is a generational task that must begin with education and civic dialogue. We also need visibility and normalization of women's leadership. The more we see women leading, the more we break stereotypes. Let's amplify the voices and achievements of women in politics, especially those who represent the most excluded communities. And lastly, it's an issue that not only affects women leaders. All women and children who are subjected to violence have the right to support and assistance. Municipalities and regions have an important responsibility in this regard. This work includes efforts to combat men's violence against women, violence in close relationships, honor-related violence and oppression, as well as prostitution and human trafficking for sexual purpose. I'm myself a councillor of my hometown Sala and a former mayor. I know what it means to lead a local authority in challenging times. As a women leader, I also know that representation counts. If you can't represent, democracy fails. And it is a fact that female representation in political leadership is still weak. We know that women are not only underrepresented, they are also to a much higher degree the target of violence and threats. Today, violence against women in politics is widespread and includes physical, sexual, psychological, and economic forms of violence. Women are targeted for their gender to undermine their participation. Female politicians experience threats such as doxing, cyber stalking, hate speech, and deep fakes. This increases the risk of violence and discourages women from political engagement. I will share with you a few findings from the CMR Women in Politics study. For instance, 13% of elected women reported experience cyber violence. Younger women are particularly vulnerable, with 67% of those who faced violence having been victims of cyber violence. Only 29% of those who experienced violence reported it, and of these, only 22% saw any consequences for the perpetrators. This underreporting is influenced by fear of reputational damage, normalizing violence as part of political life, and a lack of trust in reporting systems. Psychological violence is the most common form, with 41% of women experiencing psychological attacks on their personal lives, appearance, or status. This often leads to isolation and reduced political engagement. This leads to feeling of isolation, a loss of political focus, and many women reducing their visibility to avoid further violence. It is not a surprise that the perpetrators of these insults and threats are mostly men. We have a gender gap that fuels distrust and eroding democracy. These threats are not an isolated threat against women political leaders. They are a threat to the idea of democracy, the idea that everyone can participate and engage in democratic dialogue. Without combating threats and violence, we can't build a participatory community. At the same time, I think it goes two ways. If we really can find the ground for a wider participation in local democracy, I think we can defuse the bomb. If more people feel that they are being heard, the fewer will try to stop others from being heard. Thank you.
Carola, you highlight violence against women has both individuals and also democratic institutions, and we'll talk more about those measures that you mentioned. Now let's turn to Moretta. You know firsthand the challenges survivors and women's rights defenders face in Georgia and Eurasia. So how does violence against them affect their work, their influence on policy, and their support for each other?
Thank you for that question, Anne. Indeed, in conflict and post-conflict societies, violence against women is not just a byproduct of war, it is a deliberate tactic of punishment and control. It targets women's bodies as battlegrounds, aiming to fracture communities and silence dissent. Securing justice and accountability for survivors in this context is both urgent and deeply political. We see this clearly in Georgia's occupied territories, Abkhazia and so-called South Ossetia, where survivors of gender-based violence are trapped in legal and political limbo. These regions are effectively lawless for women's rights. Survivors face no access to impartial justice, no functioning protection mechanisms, and no independent civil society to advocate on their behalf. The occupying forces and de facto authorities not only fail to prevent violence, they often perpetrate or enable it. But the problem doesn't stop at the occupied lines. Authoritarian governments across the region, including in Georgia or Tbilisi, have repeatedly failed to uphold their obligations to survivors. They make international commitments on paper, but on the ground, they undermine independent institutions, smear women's rights defenders, and weaponize the judiciary against those who speak out. So, how do we secure justice? First, we must center survivors not just as recipients of aid, but as agents of change. And this means empower survivors by prioritizing their safety, dignity, and agency throughout legal and support processes. Ensure access to trauma-informed services, including medical care, psychological support, and legal aid, even in disrupted or fragile systems, and recognize intersectional vulnerabilities like ethnicity, displacement, disability, sexual orientation that compound barriers to justice. Secondly, legal frameworks must be strengthened. International instruments like the Rome Statute and UN Security Council resolutions 1325 and 1820 provide a foundation. But national laws must also criminalize gender-based violence and remove discriminatory barriers. Where domestic systems fail, hybrid and international tribunals must step in. Third, accountability must be structural. We need to establish independent commissions of inquiry and truth-telling processes that document abuses and recommend reparations. Use strategic litigations and universal jurisdictions to pursue justice across borders when local remedies are unavailable. Ensure command responsibility, holding military and political leaders accountable for crimes committed under their watch. Fourth, transitional justice must include gender justice. Reparations, both symbolic and material, must be offered. Institutional reform must guarantee non-repetition, and survivors must be part of truth-telling and memorialization processes. Finally, none of this is possible without political will and international solidarity. Donors must fund survivor services and civil society watchdogs. Diplomatic pressure must be applied to end impunity, and grassroots women organizations must be supported, not silenced, as they lead documentation, healing, and advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Moretta. You're right, justice does when survivors are heard, believed, and support. And it's very, of course, important with political will. Move on to Edward. Through your work with the UN and international partners, you focus on gender equality in peace and governance. How does violence against women affect the functioning of the institutions and the implementation of gender equality policies?
Hello, everyone. And this is really important to kind of talk about peace during the times when multilateralism is put on hold, and it's muted, actually. In my work with multilaterals, I found but very important that the several agendas were being put forward and followed through, which were very important and are very important instruments I should mention a few of them. The Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Violence, the Convention on the Child Rights, the Convention on, CAT, the Convention Against Torture, talking about already the mechanism, the Istanbul Convention, which is the Council of Europe mechanism. These are really, and also the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which actually try to institutionalize the equality and inclusion at every level. So when looking back at what's happening in Armenia, and we're in a very challenging region, if you were to look at the data from a Global Peace Index and look at the sub-indices of ongoing conflict and also militarization, we really have a very asymmetric region. Asymmetric in many ways. One, that we are facing a post-conflict situation with committed crimes during the war, with refugees from Nagorno-Karabakh, more than 100,000 now residing in Armenia and trying to rebuild their lives here, fully ethnically cleansed from Nagorno-Karabakh. And this micro level is at the macro level when you look at the regional competing forces, the kind of the regional heavyweights, Russia, Iran, Turkey. We, the South Caucasus countries and Armenia, are trying to gravitate towards peace. We're at a moment of very fragile peace in the region. I call it and classically speaking from the conflict theories, this is a negative peace, but still a moment of peace, which can be the foundation for building enduring peace in the region. But when you look at militarization throughout the globe, and especially when you're looking at the European Union countries, also at the backdrop of the Russia war and aggression against Ukraine, looking at how the militarization is being driven and the bilateral politics actually is escalating this kind of drive, it is really hard to withstand the regional competing interests, if I were to put it mildly. And to think of peace building in an inclusive manner. However, at the granular level, if we were to look at institutional level, we've seen in Armenia an increase of women in decision making, which is very important. We see it at the level of the parliament. We see it at the level of ministerial posts being taken by women and successfully led. We're now seeing the first time in the history, we now have the head of the police is a woman. We have the head of the Ministry of Justice, a woman. We have had an increase of judges at the Constitutional Court, which is another good thing, but it's yet not at the breaking point of 30 versus 70. We're seeing an increase in the number of judges. We have an asymmetry of having a head of the police being a woman, but then within the police system, we only have slightly above 10% of police officers being female. So if you can imagine when we're talking about GBV or DV response, what this dismal number of women means for responding to the cases of gender-based violence. On the other hand, we have a developing network and infrastructure of DV prevention and support service providers throughout the country. And these centers were also very instrumental in the post-conflict and a period when also the cleansing happened and people were arriving in Armenia. And so you had to provide the humanitarian response. So these organizations, mostly all women-led, all residing in all the regions of the country, they were responding to the refugees and the new arrivals really very promptly. This is on the other hand. So we have really those asymmetries. But then when we go to the global level of who's making the peace, who are the key negotiators of this, if I can call the joint declaration that happened very recently on August 8th, 2029, the US witnessed the signing of a joint declaration between Armenia and Azerbaijan on actually, on peace process. And one of the points is the deblockading of the road routes, which is now nominally or symbolically, it's called the Trump route of international peace and prosperity, TRIP. To put it in a short way. So this is kind of, if I were to compare what happened in the European Union post-conflict, where something that was a matter of competition, which was the steel and coal industry, became a point of reunion and actually building trust between the communities. Something like this is happening or could happen in Armenia. This was Armenia and Azerbaijan, and hopefully have wider repercussions for the South Caucasus region and also globally, because it's linking all the routes to Europe and Asia. And it is now called the Midway, kind of the middle corridor, not Zangezur corridor, but the middle corridor, if we were to talk globally. But when you look at what kind of an impact women have at that level, it's not. I could not say that we were there. We could concur to the Namibia action plan, or we could say that there were key negotiators around the table for this to happen. The only thing that I can mention is that the ambassador in the United States was a woman at the time when this joint declaration was signed. So let me stop here and just pass the word to others.
Thank you, Bart. It's encouraging to hear on the progress in gender equality in Armenia, because there's a lot to be done. And I also interesting to hear about the overview on the conventions are there. So we discuss more how the effect of those conventions, the implementations of those, and also more about the role of women in this peace building during this complex geopolitics. Julia, let's turn to you. As part of the Belarusian democratic movement, you've seen women activists face repression. And how does political violence intersect with gender-based violence, and what actually harms women continue their work despite anxiety and threats?
Thank you for this question and for the invitation to this incredible webinar. Yes, indeed, and we can see this, and there are many examples how political repressions in Belarus, in my country, has a direct link with the violence itself, and gender-based violence in particular. Unfortunately, I need to say that violence from the moment when the repression started in 2020 is a phenomenon that approved and accepted by the state level, meaning to the of this political regime that we have right now in Belarus, and it's correlated to different situations. For instance, women who are political prisoners or who have been persecuted by the regime, by the governmental structures, because of their activities and, for instance, when they are participated in the protest, or when they are human or women rights defenders. And these women, and we know these cases and these examples, they have been tortured and continue to be tortured in the prisons by special ways, just because they are women in general, or if they are women with disabilities, or they are women of middle age, or they are women with different intersectional factors. For instance, we know about how women put in the special cages and being hours on a very cold weather, and it was like a special punishment to them. or when they deprived of with the sanitary pads or any sanitary products, just also like a special punishment to them. And they when they were put to special mental hospitals as also like a special punishment to them as women who called right now or admitted by the regime as the wrong women, like me, for instance. And also, probably you know that Belarus is the only state and country in a neighboring, like Eastern Partnership, for instance, who has no any anti-discrimination legislation or legislation to prevent domestic violence. Belarus didn't sign and ratify Istanbul Convention too. So, and before 2020 and before this political crackdown started, women who are like victims of domestic violence, they have been protected and supported by women or feminist or gender organizations who opened shelters, who created a hotline for suffering of domestic violence, who did a lot of and great job for protecting women, but not only, but also trying to adopt a special legalization or law to prevent domestic violence, what was failed because of personal order by Lukashenko in 2018. But in 2021, more than 2,000 NGOs were closed administratively, and more than 130 were organizations who are running by women and for women and with women. What means that for now, unfortunately, most women who needs to be protected, who needs to get help, who need to get assistance in the case of domestic violence or gender-based violence, they are alone in these troubles because a state, as I said before, doesn't do anything, at least in the reality. Yes, there are some articles in different codes, but it's not really working. Moreover, we have different cases when women who called to the police in the situation of abuse or violation from their husbands or partners were not only helped, but received more punishments because their husbands told to the police that these women have been participating in the protests, what means for them automatically sending to the arrest, to the prison for days or for years. It depends on every case. We also know different cases when children of those women who have been active during revolution, they were very scared of this because they the social service started to say that they could be take away from their homes and from their mothers. And there are many other situations and examples that I can share, but also not only in Belarus, but for instance, for women like me, who are women rights defenders, who are politicians, who are civil activists, and live forcibly, not because of my or our really willings, but forcibly in exile. We are still under political persecution, and as well as our families, like my family, my relatives, my parents who are staying in Belarus still. I had already 5 extremist status because of my activities, as well as many other women, because as I said before, for our state, we are like wrong women, and also got recently as a status of a member of the terrorist organization that I represented here, the Belarus cabinet.
Thank you, Julia. That's for very, for describing in detail what the situation in Belarus, and not even in Belarus, also, that this violence against women just follows even when you're in exile. We'll discuss more about, the actions or what we can do about it later. So we've done the first section where we focus on how violence against women weakens democracy, limits access to justice, and make peace harder to achieve. It actually silences the voices that should be at the center of decision making. So in the next section, we'll look at the shared challenges across different contexts and how women organize to resist and rebuild. So we'll come back to you now, Carola. When women in politics are harassed or threatened, what steps can local governments and networks take to make political spaces safer and more inclusive? You mentioned that in your opening remarks, but maybe even more concrete actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I think there is a broad palette of acts that need to be done. If we start looking at what you as a municipality or a local leader can do, first of all, I would like to highlight the importance of influencing national parliaments and governments to pass laws that clearly prohibit violence against politicians. We need laws, first of all. And then I think it's necessary that you, as a local leader, also collect data about the situation. Because without data, we won't have any change. Then we also, within the municipalities, we also must create a structure that provides support to vulnerable politicians. For example, assistance to be available for contacting various authorities and reporting incidents of harassment or violence to the police, because it's very important that you report violence to the police, but it's difficult for you as a local political leader to be the one who report this. You need support in these actions. I also think it's necessary to think about to create safe environments for meeting and conferences. It can be access control, locked doors, and guards if necessary. I know by myself, being the mayor, sitting in the town hall, and I was abused by a man who wanted to kill me because I had made a lot of decisions he didn't approve. And it was very fearful to sit there and know that he could walk outside my door at the town hall with his gun. So then we start having locked doors at the town hall. And that was something very important for me, because I would like everything to be open, because I would like to get in touch with the public, with the citizens. But at the same time, I must feel safe when I are doing my duties. So this combination, of course, open, but at the same time, a safe environment for the politicians. I also think that different networks can do a lot to support female local politicians. Because very often you, as a local female politician, you feel very alone, you feel very, very vulnerable. Have lunch together with each other. It's a very simple activity, but it's so important that you as a local politician have somebody to talk to discuss questions with, because it's often very difficult to talk to your own family. because they perhaps think that you shouldn't be a politician. So therefore, the networks is so important that you can sit down, have a cup of coffee, have a lunch together, and to discuss things together. This is really supportive for female local politicians. You can also accompany the politicians to meetings if she feels insecure and needs support. And then we must, of course, talk about misinformation and disinformation, because the rise in misinformation and disinformation has real consequences on our streets, in our town halls, and in our homes. And surveys from Europe show that a quarter of respondents reported being abused or intimidated, and more than half said they had been targeted by falsehood about their personal or public political conduct. And these are not only statistics, they reflect a painful reality demonstrating how councillors and mayors, especially those from minority backgrounds or underrepresented groups, are being singled out, harassed, and threatened simply because doing their job. And that is a threat to democracy. So I think that we all have a responsibility to fight disinformation and fight misinformation. And that's a question about how we talk, how we discuss, and what we are saying. That makes change. So I think we can do a lot, every one of us, fighting these harassments. Thank you.
Thank you, Carola. You've highlighted some of the actions that how can make make it safer for political leaders, including laws, data, reporting mechanism, and the support networks. We'll talk more about that in the next section, but now let's turn to Moretta, from political leaders to support to survivors and defenders. So you've seen how solidarity often steps in when institutions fail in fragile contexts. So what form of support have proven most effective in protecting survivors and human rights defenders, Moretta?
Thank you, Anne. Yeah, indeed, in fragile and post-conflict settings where institutions are often absent, compromised, or hostile, solidarity becomes a lifeline. And we have seen it a lot in Georgia, especially after the government's attacks to human rights defenders and especially women. Only yesterday they have not acquitted, but released a woman, a teacher, a school teacher, who was arrested just because of she was demonstrating against falsified government, falsified elections and illegal government that we currently have in Georgia. She was released under bail, but they destroyed her health in prison. And the judge, she knew from the very beginning that the health was really in danger. The health of this woman was in danger, but she imprisoned her. Although why I bring this example, because it is so fresh, and when they saw that we women are together, we are solidar to each other, we support each other, we struggle together, then they were forced to release her under bail. And we hope very much that this person, whose name is Nino Datashvili, her health is better soon, she recovers. And this will be a good example for Georgian judges to refrain themselves to use the imprisonment when it is not necessary at all. But back to the back to the survivors and what do we do? The most effective forms of support when survivors and women's rights defenders have been those rooted in community trust and strategic coordination. And what we have been doing at Anti-Violence Network of Georgia, we have long understood that justice for survivors doesn't begin in the courtrooms, but it begins in communities. In a context where institutions are often slow, politicized, or outright hostile, we've built parallel systems of protection, advocacy, and care. And first, we developed survivor-centered support systems. We've established confidential hotlines, safe shelters, and mobilized crisis teams that respond rapidly to survivors of domestic and gender-based violence. These services are often the only lifeline for women in rural areas and politically sensitive regions where state protection is absent or unreliable. Legal empowerment and strategic litigation. Our legal team has provided free representation to thousands of survivors, challenging impunity and pushing for precedent-setting decisions. We have also trained local lawyers and police officers to recognize and respond to gender-based violence, often in environments where such cases were previously dismissed or ignored. We also worked a lot to run grassroots campaigns in schools, villages, and urban centers, raising awareness about gender equality, consent, and survivors' rights. These efforts have helped shift public attitudes and build local solidarity networks that protect women and girls before violence occurs. Advocacy and policy reform. AVNG has been instrumental in drafting and lobbying for national legislation on domestic violence, sexual harassment, and survivor protection. And as a result of our work, domestic violence was criminalized in Georgia. We've also contributed to shadow reports for international bodies like CEDAW and the UN Human Rights Council, ensuring that Georgia's obligations are monitored and enforced. Protection of women human rights defenders. Recognizing that activists ourselves are often targeted, we have created peer support systems, risk assessments, and emergency relocation protocols for women defenders under threat. This has been especially critical during political unrest and backlash against feminist and LGBTI movements. But regional and international solidarity is also very important. We have built bridges with organizations across Eastern Europe and South Caucasus and beyond, sharing tools and strategies and rapid response mechanisms. Whether it's supporting Ukrainian journalists in exile or coordinating with Armenian survivor networks, we know that transnational solidarity is our strongest shield. And just to be short, IVNG has not only filled the gaps left by weak institutions, we have redefined what protection looks like. We have shown that when systems fail, movement rise, and that justice is not a distant promise, but it's something we have built together every day with courage, care, and collective power. And with that said, I encourage international donor community to focus more on supporting grassroots movement in Georgia, not leave Georgia alone with the dictators and oligarchs that we are fighting for consecutive 332 days now. Thank you.
Thank you, Moretta, for highlighting the support to survivors in Georgia. Through many types of support, as you say, legal support or shadow report, advocacy. But I just really like that you underline the power of international, regional, and grassroots alliances. And Bart, your work connects research, policy, and community action. I'd like to look at the indicators. If you've seen any indicators that show peace and reconstruction processes really reflect women's priorities. And that you hear me? The question I saw
Yes,
that you.
I had a brief problem with connection.
Okay, so I just have a question for you about your work connects research and policy and community action. So I just ask if you see any indicators that show peace and reconstruction processes generally reflect women's priorities.
That's quite an interesting question. Let me take the layers apart. So on one level, when we're talking about the foundations of peace, which I would refer to as how well women are being integrated into the public process of decision making, it's being advanced. Or if I were to evaluate the state of affairs when it comes to the prevention and response to domestic violence and gender-based violence, there are a number of actions that have been taken that actually have changed the context in the country. For instance, one problem that we haven't yet come to the point of ratification of Istanbul Convention. It's one thing that I need to mention, but what I see and what several experts are observing is that, for instance, all the classifications of violence under the convention have been included in the criminal code and have been described, and these types of violence have been criminalized, except for one form of violence, which is stalking. So, and all this is being backed up by research and also advocacy. Another area that there is a push forward, it's to internationalize and to standardize the process of data collection. Carola was talking about the importance of having data. For instance, at this point, if I were to refer to any national data that we have on GBV, it would be the most recent. And let me say, the most recent report on violence against women, which was done in 2021. Mind you, we're in 2025. So we really need to ramp up our data collection practices, and we have a lot of administrative data that we can use. And that's where we've been working with the government actually to find benchmarks, for instance, the UN protocols on how the data is being collected, or the EU approach to data collection and categorization, which would allow actually to identify the gender of the offender, the gender of the victim, the causes of violence, the context, etc., etc. We need still to go through this process. But when we come to two processes, one is the very granular part, and maybe I will leave it to. Can you hear me? Okay. And if I have time left, I will mention two factors. One is the root causes, which is more the attitudes and the social norms, the gender norms. We still have a big way to go, a long way to go. 3 out of 4 men think that the final decision lays with the men. Almost half of women agree to this statement. We need to transform this mindset. When I come to the macro level, in terms of peace building and post-conflict reconstruction, when it comes to post-conflict reconstruction, I can tell that picking an infrastructure project for a deadlocked conflict that was protracted for decades is a good starting point because of two reasons. One is that the two countries didn't talk at the people-to-people level. And now we're faced with a situation when, I'm sorry, but I have to mention, on the other side, we have a problem of finding civil society organizations that are not in jail, not extradited, or not outlawed and out of the country, and are not gongos to actually hold genuine talks, women to women, on how we are going to push our governments to go beyond infrastructure projects, and especially how we are going to face the refugee crisis. Without calling anything, we need to face the crimes of war, the atrocities, and the exodus. And we need to talk not to ignite conflict, but to try to build peace, because as women, we understand it better. We feel it close to our skins.
But yeah, my question was whether you've seen any indicators that really show that women's priorities, but it seems like there's
Not
a lot
at
of
this
gaps
point.
there.
Not. It's in the background. It's more a homework that we need to do both in Armenia and in Azerbaijan in terms of their key conventions being ratified and followed through, and strengthening the civil societies in both countries. This is something we need to do. And there's a road to go through, and also to help together, which is not going to happen soon. But at that level of global talks, not really. I don't think our key concerns are addressed yet, because it's a very sensitive topic. If we start talking about the war atrocities, for instance, of women's bodies being mutilated during the war, that could bring us to a point where it could deadlock the conversation at this point. So I kind of I'm critical of the government's policies, but I also, on the other hand, understand why they are holding back on this part of the conversation yet.
Thank you. That's a strong reminder that women need to be part of defining what progress looks like. Julia, from your experience leading activism in exile, what strategies help sustain women's movements and solidarity when facing repression or threats?
As a feminist, I strongly believe in a sisterhood as a probably and for sure most productive, useful, and fruitful strategy for long or short distance. It doesn't matter. And I can see all this sisterhood not only locally or nationally when we are working together, women with women, or for gender equality, women rights, etc., but also internationally, of course. Every knowledge, experience, information that I receive from every event, like this one or another one, I bring to my colleagues, and it's strengthening us, of course, for our self-protection, but also for continue our struggling even in exile. And also all these examples that we receive and information from those women with whom we are keeping in touch, who are staying in Belarus, because there is no division for me. I mean, of course, I am living in exile, most of us, unfortunately, but also for those who are staying in Belarus, we are still Belarusian women, continuing to have our fight on the common agenda. And we have different resources, but we can help each other. I remember one example when I have been arrested and put into prison for 15 days in 2020. Me and my colleague, Olga Shparaga, we made a seminar there for our cell for our women who've been in the same cell with us, and we talked a lot about women rights, about our future, about democracy, how we can see this, about women leadership, about different things. And also, I have another example, and I know this from those women political prisoners who have been recently released, that they very much helped to other women who are in prisons right now, not by political reasons, by some other reasons. They trying to bring them and to educate them about their rights, because sometimes they really don't know how to protect themselves, especially in the situation when they're in the prison for many years because they murdered their husband in the situation of self-defense. But because their state lawyers didn't explain them that it was like a case of self-defense, they unfortunately got a prison term for a long time. And different examples of our sisterhood, how it works, for instance, in politics also. Recently, directly last week, we have been established a women political platform for those Belarusian women who or works in the political structures like me in the political democratic bodies or in the political oppositional parties still, or just including or engaging somehow in different political processes, who believes that they are political activists or politicians. And it's a great example of our political participation and engagement, and also example of how we try to support each other. Because as Carola very correct said and mentioned, that as politicians, women, we very often feel alone. And not only in such democratic countries like Sweden, but of course mostly in such still not very democratic, not only countries, but also communities. Because I would say that political culture, especially among men, in the democratic communities or democratic body is still very weak, and we face a lot of different boundaries, stereotypes, these gender focused very narrow norms, standards, and yeah, and it's still something that we need to do and protect to do every day and every minute. And I really believe that empowered women empower other women.
Yeah. Yeah, you said it's sisterhood, and as other speakers said as well, is the solidarity, is networking, is connection that keeps activism alive. So on your talks now show the resilience and cooperation across networks, borders. Now let's shift to action. The next part of the webinar, we talk about how accountability, policy, institutions can turn commitment to real protection, participation, and justice. And for audience, if you have any questions, please keep it in the chat so we have a look at them. We'll answer them after this third section. So let's start with again with Carola. You've worked a lot on connecting local action with global commitments. So how can municipalities turn those promises on women's rights and peace into concrete policies and budgets, things like that?
Thank you. Well, these frameworks, they are powerful, but they only change women's political realities when local governments operationalize them in 4 specific ways, I think. You must think laws, you must think institutions, you must think resources, and you must think accountability. First of all, I think I mentioned it before. I think we need to translate global norms into municipal or provincial laws. To pass local ordinances on gender-based political violence, harassment, and equal participation. Local bodies need to be legally bound, not just inspired by these frameworks. I also think we need to define harassment, intimidation, online abuse, and exclusion from decision making, not just physical violence. We also need to build strong institutional mechanisms. Perhaps empower a local gender and development office or women's desk within the city hall or the electoral body. Ensure it can receive complaints, investigate and trigger sanctions, not just do gender training. Integrate gender security lenses into police protocols, electoral monitoring, and candidate protection mechanism. I also think we need to put budget behind gendered political protection. It isn't enough to talk. You need to make it into reality, and then you need money. You need perhaps cover campaign security, legal aid, psychological support, digital security, child care for candidates. And I also think, and it was mentioned earlier, these hotlines. I think we need to fund rapid response hotlines and coordination with police and CSOs before and during elections. I also think we need to talk about accountability. We need to create public accountability and participatory monitoring. Perhaps require annual public gender audits of political participation and violence data, disaggregated by sector. I also think we need to tie local officials' performance evaluations to gender-inclusive governments. Well, to make it very short, local governments must legalize, institutionalize, budget, and monitor women's political protection based on the principles in the frameworks, not merely train or mainstream. Once it enters into the machinery of law, of finance, and enforcement, then it stops being a framework and becomes a shield, it becomes a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Carola. I can hear what you say, that local leaderships is really where these frameworks either succeed or fail. Morata, you've worked to strengthen accountability and survivor support. Have you seen progress in holding perpetrators accountable or supporting survivors long term?
Thank you for this question, and I will start with what we have seen globally, and landmark prosecutions through international tribunals. ICTY and ICTR has set historic precedents by prosecuting sexual violence as war crimes and crimes against humanity. Also, more recently, universal jurisdiction cases in Germany and Sweden have held Syrian officials accountable for torture and sexual violence, showing that justice can cross borders when national systems fail. In humanitarian settings, long-term support systems have gained ground, like UN Women and WHO have helped establish women's centers in refugee camps from Cox's Bazar to South Sudan, offering trauma care, legal aid, and vocational training. And these hubs serve as safe spaces and empowerment platforms. But close to home, in Georgia, progress has been hard and fragile. In the occupied territories of Abkhazia and so-called South Ossetia, survivors face near total impunity. There are no functioning courts, no independent civil society, and no access to international mechanisms. Perpetrators operate with impunity, and survivors are silenced by fear and isolations. And yet, even in this context, civil society has stepped in, and Anti-Violence Network of Georgia has built survivor-centered systems, as I have mentioned, hotline, safe shelter, legal defense, mobile crisis teams. As I have also mentioned earlier, we have trained lawyers. We tried to document abuses and pushed for legislative reforms, although we've seen also regional coalitions like WAVE or OSCE WIN project partnering with women's NGOs in Georgia, Armenia, and Ukraine to develop sustainable gender-based violence prevention and response strategies. These efforts combine survivor support with policy advocacy, creating durable change, even if in fragile states like Georgia. But I have witnessed also that our work preventing violence and supporting survivors becomes increasingly difficult. Instead of being recognized as essential, we are branded as foreign agents, and our funding is extremely restricted, and our civic space is shrinking day by day. These are not just bureaucratic hurdles in Georgia, but they are deliberate attempts to silence us who protect the most vulnerable. But progress that was done before is fading now, and authoritarian government continue to undermine accountability by smearing defenders, politicizing the judiciary, and co-opting human rights language while enabling violence. And in Georgia, the recent backlash against feminists and LGBTI activists is a stark reminder that justice must be defended and not assumed. Here, I would also like to mention that the word itself, gender, has been vanished from all the legislative acts, laws, and policy documents, which is a deep and alarming situation for us who work on gender equality. But what is the way forward? The answer lies again in solidarity, resilience, and international partnership. We need global allies who will not only fund our work, but also defend our legitimacy. We need legal and diplomatic pressure on government that criminalizes care. And above all, we need to keep showing up for survivors, for justice, and for each other. And once again, justice is not a promise, it's a practice. And every time a survivor is heard, protected, and supported long term, we move closer to making that practice is real. Thank you.
Thank you, Moretta, for highlighting the important role of civil society in providing support to survivors of violence, and also the challenges that you faced in Georgia, and what we international community can do to do about it. Now let's turn to you and Bart. Based on your experience in governance and gender reforms, what do you see as the concrete actions that governments and international partners need to take to ensure gender equality becomes an important or a permanent element of peace-building policies?
I think, speaking from the vantage point of sitting here in Armenia, the gender equality strategy 2025-2028 is a very important kind of focal point to look from. So building the economic resilience of women is one thing that is very important, which is actually ingrained in the strategy. Another important area is the education, changing one of the social institutions from norms to practices to content to training of the teachers, because kids spend most of their awake time with teachers. So we need to change the mindset of teachers as well. So that's another thing that the strategy reflects. Another area is, of course, healthcare, where general sexual and reproductive health and rights are a very important aspect of actually emancipation and bodily integrity. The right to abortion. It's not a constitutional right in our country, but it's a right that we have won. So another area is building resilience and also catering to the needs of women in times of in line with the changing climate and natural hazards hitting us back home. But this improved resilience is also, it's double faceted. It also builds the resilience against man-made disasters, which is like wars, wars or escalation of conflicts or destabilization of the situation through hitting key infrastructure in different countries. So these are some of the areas. Continuing to build the institutions, both public and private. For private institutions, I think adopting gender seals is a very nice strategy to go forward, to make gender equality the inextricable part of good governance is a very important thing. On the side of the public, again, applying the gender lens throughout the governments is another important aspect. This is at the institutional level, but I want to come to the politics as well. And unlike Sweden, Carola was more talking about the local self-governance, and it seems it's a very strong, with a long tradition of self-governance. We don't have yet that tradition where more our give and take happens at a national level. So reforming the law on political parties is a key aspect. We now have the electoral code that requires 30% of elected officials to be of any of the genders. Whereas we now need to go into the politics, the party politics, and actually embedding procedures and policies through the laws that would make the participation of women really a genuine process, so that we do not end up our elected officials, female officials, being sidelined or trying to be played as figureheads. That's at the national level. But I think there is a global level. This is something that is for a long haul. When we're talking national level, local level, it takes generations to change, and looking from our previous experience. But when we go to the global level, I think we should not give up on the situation where the multilateralism is put on hold. We need to push through the reforms in the UN system, especially the Security Council. We need to advocate for more more procedures on crimes of aggression, not only the crimes of war, but the crimes of aggression. Not only people who enact crimes of war should be convicted, but also those who start and unleash wars. If we are true to our cause, because when I'm looking at the data on militarization, especially from the vantage point of South Caucasus, there's one thing to be left. If you're a woman or a man, you think you need to be able to defend yourself, and the easiest kind of the shortcut is to take up arms. And for the short term, this is what's going to happen. We're going to get further militarized, but we need to think for a long run, and we need to really, as a sisters network, push for criminalizing the aggression and really reforming the Security Council. The aggressors cannot have a veto power and cannot mute the victims of violence. This cannot happen. And women, we have higher stakes in this. Maybe this sounds a bit discriminatory. I'm sorry, my apologies, but really we have higher stakes here. Looking at life in peril gives you a lot of pain. No matter where it happens, no matter which side of the barricades it happens, it's painful. So we need to act on this pain, and we need to make something good out of it.
Thank you, Ingeborg, for highlighting the importance of solidarity again, also of resilience, being resilient, and also the institutional reforms needed both at national and international level. Julia, you've been working across international networks and support women activists under repression. So how can civil society and the international community improve protection and strengthen their voices?
Thank you for the question. Yes. I would say that today, as never, we need to be more solidarity in our common work, because today we can see that dictators not only falsifying the elections, but they elected democratically in different countries, if we are saying about the US, for instance. And for me, as for politicians and civil society activists and women rights defenders, it's a crucial thing that democracy should be apply for democratization. I mean, when we repeat this democratization in different steps and using different tools for advocating and promoting gender equality or women's rights or women political empowerment in particular. And civil society and every our coalition has this crucial role today as probably never before, because as I mentioned, and also as Carola mentioned in the beginning, that so far we have a big increasing of anti-gender movements, different attractions of male anti-gender or anti-feminist allies like manosphere, etc. And also a big thing that they have much more resources, especially financial ones, than we very often, because anti-gender movements are supported by other dictators, like, for instance, Putin or Russian regime. What means that we need to demand from those who have power, who have political will, from our politicians, nationally or globally, to take into account the voice of civil society actors in every policies that they make. Otherwise, we lose our power, and it's really very hard to be or to advocate any kind of feminist approach or gender equality agenda or law or anything else without this. And as an example, Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum is a good coalition of those civil society organizations who are part of their national platforms and who can bring all these questions and issues and problems to the table of the agenda and making us stronger together in order to discuss all these things and find maybe not just a common solution, but something that we can use in our maybe sometimes different realities if we compare what is happening in Belarus or in Armenia or in Azerbaijan or in Georgia or in Ukraine. We have our specific things that happening, but also we have more in common, especially when we have sides of different authoritarian governments or regimes, or war situation like in Ukraine, or conflict and post-conflict situations.
So here again, we can see you highlighted the coalition, also inclusion of civil society in decision making, resources important, and also, solidarity again. I don't think we have any question from the audience, and we have 4 minutes left. So I just want to close this webinar with one question to all of you. So if you can choose just one change in policy or mindset or action that would most reduce violence against women and strengthen peace, what would that be? 1 minute each. Very short, please. Carola.
Thank you very much. Well, in short, more women at the decision-making tables. And I would like to end by quoting Shirley Chisholm. She was a lawyer in USA and the first Black woman who ran for president many decades ago. She said, "If they don't give you a seat at the decision-making table, bring a folding chair." Thank you.
Thank you. Moreta.
Yeah, very difficult to say in 1 minute what we should do, but I agree with Carol that indeed we need more women in decision-making places, more solidarity and less shaming. Shaming is the trendy thing now, not only in Georgia, but worldwide. So we need less shaming, more solidarity in support of women who decide to be in decision-making places, in politics, in media, in human rights defending or LGBTI rights defenders front lines, and more funding, which definitely supports strengthening the networks and women in decision-making poses. Thank you.
Thank you, Moreta. Vad, what do you think?
I want to agree with all the thoughts expressed, and I want to reiterate the importance of decision making and at all levels, from local level to the most global. And I want, I'm kind of torn apart. I don't know which one to choose, but I would rather opt for advocating for the revival of peace talks at the global level and women around the table really asking for change and reform at the UN decision-making level, and more women representation, but at the core, reforming the Security Council and recognizing the crimes of aggression.
Thank you. Julia, what's your final thought?
First of all, I totally agree with all my incredible women colleagues and speakers. But what I can add that I really see that we need to have more safe space and trusted and respectful atmosphere, and also well-being support for women who are in politics, in decision-making process, in every part of activism, because really we need to have more resources for ourselves as well in order to continue our great job.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all speakers, for these powerful closing thoughts. And today's discussions make one point clear: violence against women undermines peace and democracy, and peace cannot thrive where women's rights are denied. So, on behalf of Forum SIP and WinNet Sweden, thank you, all speakers, and everyone who joined us today. Goodbye.